I was sitting at my kitchen table in Scottsdale, Arizona, staring at a stack of old documents when I realized I might have just discovered the nuclear option that would end my nightmare HOA once and for all. The yellowed paper in my hands showed an easement from 1967, decades before the Sunset Ridge development even existed, and it granted perpetual access rights to the original property owner across what was now the only entrance to our gated community. My name is Connor Vaughn, and I had been battling the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association for 8 months. It started innocuously enough when I painted my front door a shade of blue that was supposedly not on the approved color list. The fine was $200. Then they cited me for having my trash cans visible from the street for more than 4 hours on a non-collection day. Another $150. When I installed solar panels without their permission, even though Arizona state law explicitly protected my right to do so, they threatened to put a lien on my house. The president of the HOA was a woman named Brenda Patterson, and she was exactly what you would picture when someone says HOA Karen. Mid-40s, blonde highlights, always wearing athleisure wear despite never actually exercising, and wielding her clipboard like a weapon of mass destruction. She drove a white Mercedes SUV and had made it her personal mission to make my life miserable ever since I refused to remove a small vegetable garden from my backyard because it was unsightly and could be seen from her second-story window if she really craned her neck. I had bought my house 2 years ago, a beautiful 4-bedroom Spanish-style home with terracotta tiles and a mountain view. I paid $675,000 for it, and I loved everything about the place except for the HOA. But Brenda and her board of busybodies had turned my dream home into a source of constant stress. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago when I received a certified letter stating that I was being fined $500 for unauthorized modifications to the exterior structure because I had installed a Ring doorbell, a doorbell camera. They claimed it violated the architectural guidelines because it was not the same color as my door frame. I had reached my limit. That is when I decided to dig into the property records. I'm a real estate attorney, though I specialize in commercial properties, and I knew that sometimes old documents could reveal interesting details that modern developers either forgot about or hoped no one would find. I spent an entire Saturday at the Maricopa County Recorder's Office going through dusty files and microfilm records dating back to the 1960s. What I found was pure gold. The land that Sunset Ridge now occupied was originally part of a much larger parcel owned by a man named Harold Zimmerman. In 1967, Zimmerman sold off a 5-acre section to a man named Robert Chen, but he retained an easement across a portion of the property for access to water rights in the main road. The easement was recorded and legally binding. The thing was that 5-acre section was now the location of our community's main entrance, guardhouse, and the first 30 yards of our private road. When the developer built Sunset Ridge in 2003, they apparently either did not do proper due diligence or thought the easement had been abandoned. It had not. Under Arizona law, an easement does not just disappear unless it is formally terminated or abandoned through non-use for a very extended period, and the specific language in this easement included the phrase, perpetual right of access and egress. Here was the kicker. I had bought the old Chen property last year, not my house in Sunset Ridge, but a small vacant lot about a mile away that I picked up as an investment for $35,000. I had not thought much about it, just figured I would hold it for a few years and maybe build a rental property. When I pulled the title history, I realized it was the same parcel that Robert Chen had purchased from Zimmerman in 1967, which meant I now held the easement rights. The easement that gave me legal authority over the main access point to a community of 230 homes. I sat back in my chair and let out a long breath. This was insane. This was perfect. This was exactly what I needed. I spent the next week consulting with 2 other real estate attorneys who specialized in property rights and easements. I needed to be absolutely certain before I made any moves. Both of them came to the same conclusion. The easement was valid, enforceable, and gave me significant leverage over the HOA. One of them, an older guy named Marcus who had been practicing for 40 years, actually laughed when he saw the documents. "This is the kind of thing that only happens once in a career," he said, "that HOA is going to lose their minds." "What can I actually do with this?" I asked. "Well, you have the right to access the property per the easement, but more importantly, any obstruction of that easement is technically illegal. That guardhouse, that gate, they were built on property where you have perpetual access rights. You could argue that they need your permission to even have those structures there. So I could make them remove the gate? Theoretically, or you could negotiate. You hold all the cards here, Connor. Just be smart about how you play them." I decided to start with a formal letter. I wanted documentation of everything, a paper trail that would hold up if this went to court. I drafted a notice informing the HOA board that I held an easement across their property and that the current structures were in violation of my easement rights. I kept it professional and included copies of all the relevant documents. I sent it via certified mail to Brenda Patterson and the 4 other board members. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize, but I answered anyway. "Is this Connor Vaughn?" a woman's voice asked. She sounded furious. "Speaking." "This is Brenda Patterson from the Sunset Ridge HOA board. What the hell is this letter you sent us?" "It is exactly what it says. I hold an easement across the property where your main entrance is located. I am informing you of my rights." "This is ridiculous. That easement is from the 1960s. It does not mean anything now." "Actually, Mrs. Patterson, it means quite a lot. The easement is perpetual and was never formally terminated. I have had multiple attorneys review it. It is completely valid. We have a lawyer too, Mr. Vaughn. You cannot just come in here and make demands about property that belongs to the HOA. The property does not belong to the HOA. The HOA has certain rights to maintain common areas, but that land is still subject to previously recorded easements. I am not making demands. I am informing you of the legal reality." There was silence on the other end. Then she said, "What do you want?" "I want all of my fines rescinded. I want a formal apology from the board, and I want the HOA covenants amended to remove the ridiculous restrictions that serve no purpose except to harass homeowners." "That is insane. We are not doing any of that." "Then I guess we will see what happens. Have a nice day, Mrs. Patterson." I hung up before she could respond. My heart was pounding. I had just declared war on the HOA, and there was no going back now. The next board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. These meetings were open to all homeowners, and I made sure to be there early. The meetings were held in the community clubhouse, a nice facility with a meeting room that could hold about 50 people. Usually, only the board members and maybe 5 or 6 residents showed up. Tonight, there were at least 40 people crammed into the space. Word had gotten around. I was not the only person in Sunset Ridge who hated the HOA. Brenda and her board had made enemies of dozens of homeowners with their petty fines and arbitrary enforcement of rules. When people heard that someone was finally pushing back, they wanted to see what would happen. Brenda called the meeting to order at 7 o'clock sharp. She looked even more pinched than usual, her mouth set in a thin line. The other board members included Gary Sullivan, a retired accountant who seemed to enjoy the tiny amount of power the board gave him. Patricia Moore, an older woman who mostly just agreed with whatever Brenda said. Tom Henderson, a guy in his 50s who owned a car dealership and barely paid attention to HOA matters. And Linda Kowalski, who was relatively new to the board and seemed uncomfortable with the whole situation. After the usual opening business, Brenda cleared her throat. "Before we proceed with tonight's agenda, I want to address a matter that has come to our attention. A homeowner has made some claims about an alleged easement across HOA property. The board has consulted with our attorney, and we have been advised that these claims are without merit. The HOA was legally established and has full authority over all common areas." I raised my hand. "Point of order, Mrs. Patterson. That is not what your attorney said, is it?" Her face flushed. "Excuse me?" I said that is not what your attorney actually told you, because I have already reached out to him, and he confirmed that the easement is valid. What he probably said was that you should try to negotiate a settlement. The room erupted in murmurs. Brenda looked like she wanted to reach across the table and strangle me. "Mr. Vaughn, you have no right to contact our attorney." "I did not contact him as a representative of the HOA. I contacted him as an opposing party in a potential legal dispute, and he was very forthcoming about the validity of my easement. Gary Sullivan leaned forward. What exactly is this easement you keep talking about? I stood up and held up the documents. In 1967, an easement was recorded that grants perpetual access rights across what is now the location of our main entrance and guardhouse. I purchased the property that holds those easement rights. Under Arizona law, the HOA cannot obstruct my easement, which means the current gate and guardhouse are technically in violation. What does that mean practically? Someone called out from the audience. It means I have legal authority over whether that gate stays open or closed. It means the HOA built structures on property where I have legal rights. It means I have leverage. The room exploded with noise. People were talking over each other, some demanding to see the documents, others asking questions. Brenda banged her gavel repeatedly. Order! This is not a discussion forum. Mr. Vaughn, you are out of line. I am a homeowner at an open meeting. I'm completely within my rights. Tom Henderson spoke up for the first time. Look, maybe we should just talk about this reasonably. What do you want, Connor? Before I could answer, Brenda cut in. We are not negotiating anything. This whole thing is a bluff. If Mr. Vaughn thinks he can bully this board, he is very mistaken. It is not a bluff, I said calmly. And I have already filed a formal complaint with the county. If the board refuses to acknowledge my easement rights, I will file for an injunction to remove the structures that are obstructing it. That was not entirely true. I had not filed anything yet. But the threat was real enough, and I could tell it landed. Linda Kowalski looked genuinely worried. Even Gary seemed less confident. This meeting is adjourned, Brenda announced abruptly. The board will discuss this matter in the executive session. People were still shouting questions as the board members filed out into a back room. I was immediately surrounded by other homeowners, some thanking me, others asking how they could help. A guy named Jeff, who lived 3 streets over, shook my hand vigorously. Man, I've been waiting for someone to stand up to Brenda for years. She fined me $600 because my lawn was a 1/4 inch too long. Whatever you need, I am in. I exchanged contact information with about a dozen people that night. By the time I left the clubhouse at 9:30, I had the beginnings of a coalition. Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated quickly. The HOA hired a real estate litigation attorney, a woman named Rachel Brennan, who had a reputation for being aggressive. She sent me a cease and desist letter claiming that my interpretation of the easement was incorrect and that any attempt to interfere with HOA operations would result in legal action. I responded with my own letter, drafted with the help of Marcus, reiterating the validity of the easement and providing even more documentation. I also included a survey I had commissioned that clearly showed the easement boundaries overlapping with the guardhouse and front gate. Then, Brenda made a critical mistake. She decided to retaliate. I came home from work one day to find a notice taped to my door. It was a violation for excessive noise stemming from my air conditioning unit. The fine was $300, and the notice stated that if I did not replace the unit within 30 days, the fine would increase to $100 per day. There was nothing wrong with my air conditioning unit. It was only 2 years old and operated well within normal noise parameters. I had a feeling Brenda had personally walked by my house with a decibel meter just looking for an excuse to fine me. I took photos of the notice, documented everything, and then did something that probably was not the smartest move, but felt incredibly satisfying. I went to the guardhouse at the main entrance. The guard on duty was a guy named Miguel, who I had chatted with a few times. Nice guy, worked nights to help pay for his daughter's college. "Hey, Miguel," I said, rolling down my window. "Evening, Mr. Vaughn. How are you?" "I am good. Listen, I need to let you know something. I own an easement across this property. That means I actually have legal authority over this entrance. I'm not saying this to cause you any problems, but the HOA and I are in a dispute, and things might get complicated." Miguel looked confused. "I just work here, man. I do not want any trouble." "You would not be in trouble. I just wanted to give you a heads up. If anyone asks, you and I had this conversation." I drove through, feeling the adrenaline pumping. I knew that Brenda would hear about this, and I knew she would overreact. Sure enough, the next day I received an email from Rachel Brennan, the HOA's attorney. The email informed me that if I made any further threats or intimidating statements to HOA employees or residents, they would seek a restraining order. They also claimed that my actions constituted harassment. I forwarded the email to Marcus, who called me 20 minutes later laughing. "They are grasping at straws," he said. "You did not threaten anyone. You informed a security guard about a legal matter. That is not harassment." "So what is my next move?" "File your injunction. Make it real. Right now they think you are bluffing. Show them you are not." I spent the weekend preparing the paperwork. On Monday morning, I filed a complaint in Maricopa County Superior Court seeking an injunction against the HOA for obstruction of my easement rights. I also filed a counterclaim against all the fines they had levied against me, arguing that they were retaliatory and in bad faith. The filing became public record, and within days, a local news reporter got wind of it. Her name was Jessica Torres, and she worked for a Phoenix television station. She called me on a Wednesday afternoon. "Mr. Vaughn, I am doing a story about your lawsuit against the Sunset Ridge HOA. Would you be willing to talk to me?" I hesitated. Media attention could cut both ways, but I also knew that public pressure might help my case. "Sure," I said. "When do you want to meet?" We met at a coffee shop near my office the next day. Jessica was in her early 30s, sharp and professional. She had already done her homework, pulling the court documents and the easement records. "This is a fascinating case," she said, setting up a small camera. "David versus Goliath, but with a legal twist. Do you mind if we do this on camera?" "Go ahead." She asked me to explain the situation, and I walked her through the whole thing. The harassment from the HOA, the discovery of the easement, the potential implications. I made sure to emphasize that I was not trying to destroy the HOA or hurt my neighbors. I just wanted fair treatment and reasonable rules. "What does the HOA say about all this?" she asked. "You would have to ask them. But my sense is that they are more interested in maintaining their authority than in doing what is right for the community." The story aired 2 days later during the evening news. It was a 4-minute segment titled "Homeowner Discovers Legal Loophole in HOA Fight." They interviewed me, showed footage of the Sunset Ridge entrance, and included a brief statement from Brenda Patterson, who said, "The HOA board is committed to maintaining property values and community standards. We believe Mr. Vaughn's claims are without merit, and we will vigorously defend against this lawsuit." She looked absolutely furious on camera, her face tight and her voice clipped. The story went semi-viral locally. It got picked up by a few online news sites and shared widely on social media. Suddenly, I was getting messages from people all over Arizona who had their own HOA horror stories. Some were funny, some were infuriating, but they all had the same theme: HOAs with too much power and no accountability. The attention also brought some unexpected support. A nonprofit organization called the Arizona Homeowners' Rights Coalition reached out to offer assistance. They had been advocating for HOA reform for years and saw my case as an opportunity to highlight the need for better oversight. The preliminary hearing for my injunction was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. This time, they did not make it open to homeowners. It was a closed executive session, which was technically allowed under the bylaws for legal matters. But Jeff, the guy who had shaken my hand at the previous meeting, had a friend on the board. Not one of the main 5, but someone on a subcommittee who sat in on the meeting. He texted Jeff afterwards, and Jeff called me that night. "Dude, they are freaking out. Apparently their attorney told them that your easement claim is solid and that they will probably lose if it goes to trial. Brenda wants to fight anyway, but Tom and Linda are pushing to settle." "What about Gary and Patricia?" "Gary is Team Brenda all the way. Patricia seems conflicted, but here's the thing. Their attorney also told them that if they lose, they might be personally liable for damages because they have been acting in bad faith with all these retaliatory fines." That was interesting. If the board members could be held personally liable, it changed the dynamic. Suddenly, this was not just about the HOA's money. It was about their own bank accounts. "Thanks for the intel," I said. "No problem. A lot of us are rooting for you. Just do not back down." The hearing arrived on a Tuesday morning in early March. The courthouse in downtown Phoenix was busy, with people filing in and out for various cases. I met Marcus in the lobby, and we went through security together. Remember, he said, today is just preliminary. The judge is going to hear arguments about the injunction. We need to show that you have a valid easement and that the HOA's structures are interfering with it. Got it. The HOA's attorney, Rachel Brennan, was already in the courtroom when we arrived. She was a tall woman in her 40s with dark hair pulled back in a bun. She barely acknowledged us, flipping through her notes with an air of confidence. Brenda Patterson was there too, sitting in the front row with Gary Sullivan. She glared at me as I walked past. The judge was a woman named Honor Margaret Fieldstone, probably in her late 50s, with a no-nonsense demeanor. She called the case and asked for opening arguments. Marcus went first, laying out the history of the easement, the documentation we had, and the fact that the HOA had built structures without acknowledging the existing legal rights. He was calm and methodical, and I could tell Judge Fieldstone was paying close attention. Rachel Brennan's argument was that the easement, even if technically valid, had been effectively abandoned through decades of non-use, and that the HOA had built the entrance in good faith. She also argued that granting an injunction would cause significant harm to 230 homeowners who relied on the gate and guardhouse for security. Judge Fieldstone asked several pointed questions, especially about the abandonment claim. Marcus was ready with case law showing that easements in Arizona required clear evidence of intent to abandon, not just non-use. After about 90 minutes of arguments, the judge said, "I am going to take this under advisement. I will issue a ruling within 2 weeks. In the meantime, both parties are ordered to refrain from any retaliatory actions. That means no more fines for Mr. Vaughn. And Mr. Vaughn, you are not to interfere with the normal operations of the guardhouse. Understood?" We both agreed. As we left the courtroom, I felt cautiously optimistic. Judge Fieldstone seemed to take the easement seriously, and Rachel Brennan had not been able to effectively counter our documentation. The 2 weeks of waiting were nerve-wracking. I tried to focus on work, but I kept checking my email obsessively for any updates. Other homeowners in Sunset Ridge were also anxious. The story had spread throughout the community and people were divided. Some supported me, seeing this as a chance to reform the HOA. Others thought I was being selfish and putting the community at risk. One evening, I came home to find a note slipped under my door. It was handwritten and unsigned. "You are going to regret this. Drop the lawsuit or face the consequences." I took a photo of the note and forwarded it to Marcus. He advised me to file a police report, which I did. The officer who took the report was polite but did not seem particularly concerned. "Probably just someone letting off steam," he said, "but we will keep it on file." I installed additional security cameras around my house that night. The judge's ruling came on a Friday afternoon. I was in a meeting when Marcus called, so I stepped out into the hallway. "We won," he said. "Preliminary injunction granted. The judge ruled that the easement is valid and that the HOA must acknowledge your rights." She stopped short of ordering the removal of the guardhouse, but she did order both parties into mediation to work out a resolution. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. So what happens now? Mediation. We will sit down with the HOA and a neutral third party, and we will try to reach an agreement. You have all the leverage here, Connor. Use it wisely. The mediation was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, I received a formal letter from the HOA board stating that all pending fines against me were being rescinded without admission of wrongdoing. It was a small victory, but a satisfying one. I also started hearing from other homeowners who wanted to join a broader effort to reform the HOA. We organized a meeting at Jeff's house, and about 20 people showed up. The energy in the room was electric. People shared their own stories of abuse by the board, fines for minor infractions, arbitrary enforcement of rules, refusal to maintain common areas while spending money on pet projects. "We should recall the entire board," someone suggested. "That's not easy," another person said. "The bylaws require a 2/3 vote of all homeowners, not just the ones who show up. So we get the votes. We go door to door if we have to." I listened to the discussion, feeling a sense of solidarity. This was bigger than just my fight now. It was about changing the culture of the HOA and making it actually serve the community instead of a few power-hungry board members. The mediation took place at a law office in Scottsdale. The mediator was a retired judge named Harold Epstein. a calm, grandfatherly man who specialized in property disputes. The setup was simple. Both sides in separate rooms, with Judge Epstein shuttling back and forth to facilitate negotiations. I was in one conference room with Marcus. In the other room were Brenda Patterson, Gary Sullivan, Tom Henderson, and Rachel Brennan. Judge Epstein started by meeting with us. "Mr. Vaughn, you have a very strong legal position. The easement is valid, and the court has recognized that. But I want you to think about what you really want here. Do you want to tear down the guardhouse and create chaos for your neighbors? Or do you want reasonable reforms and fair treatment?" "I want the latter," I said. "I have never wanted to hurt the community. I just want the HOA to be reasonable." "Good. Let me go talk to the other side." He was gone for about 30 minutes. When he came back, he said, "They are willing to discuss settlement terms, but Mrs. Patterson is resistant. She feels that giving in to your demands sets a bad precedent." "This is not about demands. It is about basic fairness." "I understand. Let me keep working on them." The mediation lasted 6 hours. Judge Epstein went back and forth, slowly narrowing the gap between our positions. Finally, around 4 in the afternoon, he came back with a proposal. "Here is what they are offering. All fines against you are permanently rescinded. You will have input into a committee that reviews and reforms the HOA covenants. Any new fines or violations will go through a formal hearing process with the right to appeal. In exchange, you agree not to pursue further legal action related to the easement, and you grant the HOA a license to maintain the guardhouse and gate on the easement property." I looked at Marcus. He nodded slightly. "What about Brenda Patterson?" I asked. "Does she remain as president?" Judge Epstein hesitated. "That is not something they can negotiate here. The board officers are elected by the homeowners. Then I want one more thing. I want the bylaws amended to make it easier to recall board members, lower the threshold from 2/3 to a simple majority." Judge Epstein raised his eyebrows. "That is a significant change. It is also necessary. If the community is unhappy with the board, they should be able to do something about it." He went back to the other room. This time, he was gone for almost an hour. When he returned, he looked tired. "They agree. They will put the recall amendment to a vote of the full membership. If it passes, it becomes part of the bylaws." I felt a smile spread across my face. "Then we have a deal." The settlement was drafted and signed that evening. It was not total victory, but it was close. I had achieved everything I set out to do. The fines were gone, the HOA would be reformed, and the community would have more power to hold the board accountable. But the story did not end there. 2 weeks after the mediation, a group of homeowners filed a formal recall petition against Brenda Patterson, Gary Sullivan, and Patricia Moore. The petition cited abuse of power, mismanagement of funds, and creating a hostile environment for residents. Under the new bylaws, they needed 51% of homeowners to sign the petition. They got 67%. The recall election was held on a Saturday in April. I was not directly involved in organizing it, but I voted along with over 180 other homeowners. The results were decisive. All 3 board members were removed. Tom Henderson and Linda Kowalski remained on the board, and 3 new members were elected, including Jeff. The new board's first action was to hire an independent auditor to review the HOA's finances. What they found was disturbing. Over the past 3 years, Brenda Patterson had approved thousands of dollars in questionable expenses, lavish dinners charged to the HOA, payments to landscaping companies owned by her brother-in-law, and even a consulting fee that she had paid herself without board approval. The total amount of misappropriated funds was estimated at over $40,000. Jeff called me when they discovered the extent of the problem. "Connor, this is bad. We are talking potential fraud. The board is meeting with a lawyer tomorrow to figure out what to do." "You need to report it," I said. "If she stole money from the HOA, that is a crime." "I know, but some people are worried about the publicity. They think it will hurt property values." "Property values will be fine, but if you sweep this under the rug, it sends a message that people can get away with this stuff." The new board ultimately decided to file a report with the Scottsdale Police Department. A detective named Sarah Patel was assigned to the case. She was thorough and professional, spending several weeks reviewing financial records and interviewing board members. In late May, Brenda Patterson was arrested and charged with theft and fraud. The arrest made the local news, and Jessica Torres did a follow-up story connecting it to the original HOA dispute. The headline was, HOA President Arrested After Dispute Over Easement Exposes Financial Misconduct. I watched the news coverage from my living room, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sadness. I'd not set out to destroy Brenda's life. I just wanted to be left alone. But her own actions, her refusal to back down, her escalation at every turn had led to this. The criminal case moved slowly through the system. Brenda's attorney negotiated a plea deal. She would plead guilty to reduce charges, pay restitution, and serve a year of probation. She would also be permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. By the time summer rolled around, Sunset Ridge had transformed. The new board implemented common-sense reforms, simplified the architectural guidelines, reduced fines, and created a transparent process for resolving disputes. Homeowners actually started attending board meetings again, not out of fear, but because they felt like their voices mattered. I finally got around to developing my small lot, the one with the easement. I decided to build a modest rental property, a 3-bedroom house that I could lease out for extra income. The irony was not lost on me. The property that had given me leverage over the HOA was now just another piece of my investment portfolio. One evening in July, I was watering my vegetable garden when my neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Chen, called over the fence. "Mr. Vaughn, I just wanted to say thank you. My husband and I were so stressed about the HOA before. Now it is like a different place." "I appreciate that, Mrs. Chen, but it was not just me. A lot of people worked to make these changes. Still, you started it. You stood up when no one else would." I smiled. "Sometimes you just have to check the county records." She laughed, and I went back to my tomatoes. The case became something of a legend in Arizona HOA circles. I got calls from homeowners across the state asking for advice on their own disputes. Some of the situations were similar to mine, others were completely different, but they all shared a common theme: people feeling powerless against organizations that were supposed to serve them. I even got invited to speak at a state legislative hearing about HOA reform. I testified for about 15 minutes, explaining my experience and advocating for stronger oversight and easier recall mechanisms. A few months later, the legislature passed a bill that implemented some of those reforms statewide. Looking back on the whole experience, I realized it was never really about the easement. The easement was just a tool, a piece of leverage that forced people to pay attention. What mattered was that a community came together, pushed back against abuse, and created something better. Brenda Patterson eventually moved out of Sunset Ridge. I heard through the grapevine that she relocated to Tucson and took a job in retail. Gary Sullivan moved too, apparently too embarrassed to stay after his role in the financial misconduct came to light. Patricia Moore stayed but kept a low profile, rarely seen at community events. As for me, I continued living in my house with the blue door, growing my vegetables and enjoying the mountain view. The solar panels worked perfectly, generating enough power to cut my electricity bill in half. My Ring doorbell recorded the occasional delivery driver, but mostly just captured footage of rabbits hopping across my front yard. One Saturday afternoon in September, almost a year after I first discovered the easement, Jeff stopped by with a 6-pack of beer. We sat on my back patio watching the sun set over the mountains. "You know what is crazy?" Jeff said. "A year ago, this place was miserable. Now I actually like living here. It just took people standing up." "No, man, it took you standing up. The rest of us were too scared or too apathetic. You were the one who actually did something." I took a sip of my beer. I was just tired of being pushed around. "Well, whatever the reason, I'm glad you did it." We clinked bottles and watched the sky turn orange and pink. The air was still warm, but there was a hint of fall coming. Somewhere in the neighborhood, kids were playing basketball, the sound of the ball bouncing on pavement carrying across the quiet streets. It was peaceful. It was home. And for the first time since I bought the place, I felt like I actually belonged in Sunset Ridge. Not because the HOA said I could, but because I had fought for it and won. The community had been through a lot over the past year. There had been conflict, anger, and even some friendships that were damaged. But there had also been growth. People were more engaged, more willing to speak up, more invested in making the neighborhood a place where everyone could thrive. The new board continued to make improvements. They renegotiated contracts with vendors, saving the HOA tens of thousands of dollars. They organized community events, movie nights in the park, food truck festivals, a Halloween parade for kids. They created a transparency portal on the website where homeowners could see every financial transaction in real time. Property values actually went up. Turns out, people wanted to live in a community with a functional, fair HOA rather than one ruled by petty tyrants. I even started dating someone I met at one of the community events. Her name was Wendy Olson, and she lived 4 streets over. She was a teacher at a local elementary school, warm and funny, with a sharp wit that I found incredibly attractive. Our first date was at a Mexican restaurant in Old Town Scottsdale, and we talked for 3 hours about everything except the HOA drama. "I heard about what you did," she said eventually. "Pretty much everyone in the neighborhood knows the story." "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "Depends. Are you going to use your secret legal powers to fight all our battles now?" I laughed. "I think I am retired from HOA warfare." "Good. Because I just want to date a normal guy who happens to have discovered an obscure property easement that changed the course of local governance." "Is that all?" She smiled. "That is all." We started seeing each other regularly after that. She was easy to be around, and she had no interest in rehashing the whole HOA saga. We went hiking, tried new restaurants, and spent lazy Sunday mornings reading the newspaper and drinking coffee. It was simple and uncomplicated, exactly what I needed after a year of chaos. By the time the holidays rolled around, Sunset Ridge felt like a completely different place. The new board organized a Christmas lights competition, and dozens of homes participated. There was a spirit of friendly competition rather than the fear of violation notices that would have existed under the old regime. I strung lights along my roof and wrapped the palm trees in my front yard with colored bulbs. Wendy came over to help, and we drank hot chocolate while untangling strands of lights that had somehow become impossibly knotted in storage. "This is nice," she said, looking around at the neighborhood. Houses were lit up in every direction, displays ranging from elegant to gloriously tacky. "You helped make this possible, you know. I just found an old document. You did more than that. You gave people hope that they could change things." I thought about that. Maybe she was right. Maybe the real victory was not the legal settlement or the recall election or even Brenda's arrest. Maybe it was the fact that people believed they had power again. On Christmas Eve, the community held a caroling event. About 50 people showed up, including families with kids, retirees, and even some of the new homeowners who had moved in over the past few months. We walked through the streets singing carols, and people came out of their houses to listen and join in. At one point, we passed Brenda's old house. The new owners had put up an enormous inflatable Santa on the front lawn, something that definitely would not have been allowed under the old regime. Someone in the group made a joke about it, and everyone laughed. It was a moment of collective catharsis, a recognition that we had moved past the darkness and into something better. As the new year began, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. It had been exhausting and stressful, but also weirdly fulfilling. I had learned that standing up for yourself mattered, that ordinary people could make a difference, and that sometimes the answer to a seemingly impossible problem was sitting in a dusty file at the county recorder's office. The easement itself had become almost irrelevant. I still technically held the rights, and the settlement granted the HOA a license to use the property. But it was more symbolic now, a reminder of what was possible when someone pushed back. Marcus retired in February, and I went to his farewell party at a steakhouse downtown. He pulled me aside at one point and said, "You know, in 40 years of practicing law, your case was one of the most satisfying. Not because of the legal complexity, but because it actually mattered. You changed people's lives. I could not have done it without you. Sure you could have. You had the guts and the documents. I just helped with the paperwork." I hugged him, feeling grateful for his guidance and friendship. In March, I got a call from a documentary filmmaker who wanted to make a short film about the case. I politely declined. The story had been told enough, and I was ready to move on with my life. But I appreciated that it had resonated with people, that it had become a symbol of resistance against bureaucratic tyranny. Wendy and I took a trip to San Diego in April, spending a long weekend walking on the beach and eating fish tacos. We did not talk about HOAs or easements or any of it. We just enjoyed being together, two people who had found each other in the middle of chaos. One night, sitting on the balcony of our hotel room watching the waves, she said, "I love you, you know. I love you too." It felt right. It felt like the best thing to come out of the whole mess. By the time summer came around again, Sunset Ridge had fully transformed into the kind of community I had hoped for when I bought my house. The board was functional and transparent, neighbors were friendly and engaged, and the rules were reasonable and fairly enforced. I continued working as a real estate attorney, though I took on a few more HOA-related cases after my experience. Word had spread, and people sought me out specifically because they knew I understood the dynamics and the legal issues. I helped several homeowners successfully challenge unfair fines and even worked with a few communities to completely rewrite their governing documents. Each case was different, but they all reinforced the same lesson. HOAs could be forces for good or forces for oppression, and the difference came down to accountability and transparency. In August, Jeff was elected president of the Sunset Ridge HOA board. He called me the night he was elected, sounding both excited and terrified. "What did I just sign up for?" he asked. "The opportunity to actually help people. Just remember why we did all this in the first place. Do not let power corrupt me?" Exactly. He did a great job. Under his leadership, the board continued the reforms, creating a culture where homeowners felt heard and respected. Violations were handled with common sense rather than rigid enforcement. The community thrived. As for the rental property I built on the easement lot, it turned out to be a great investment. I rented it to a young couple who were both teachers, and they loved the place. The rental income more than covered the mortgage, and the property value appreciated steadily. Sometimes I would drive by and think about how that little lot had changed everything. It was just 5 acres of desert land, nothing special, but it had held the key to standing up against injustice. Wendy moved in with me in October. We talked about getting married eventually, but there was no rush. We were happy, and that was enough. One evening in November, almost 2 years after I first discovered the easement, we hosted a dinner party at our house. Jeff and his wife came, along with several other neighbors who had been part of the effort to reform the HOA. We cooked a massive meal, drank wine, and told stories late into the night. At one point, someone proposed a toast to Connor for checking the county records and changing all our lives. Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine. These were my people, my community, my home. To all of us, I said, for standing up and making things better. We clinked glasses and drank, and the conversation flowed on. Outside, the desert night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. I looked around the table at the faces of my friends and neighbors, at Wendy sitting beside me with her hand in mine, and I felt profoundly grateful. Grateful for the easement that started it all, grateful for the courage to fight back, and grateful for the community that emerged from the chaos. It had been a hell of a ride, but sitting there that night, surrounded by people I cared about in a place I loved, I knew it had all been worth it. The HOA drama had faded into memory, replaced by block parties and potlucks and the ordinary rhythms of neighborhood life. Brenda Patterson was a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened when power went unchecked. But she was also proof that systems could change, that regular people could stand up and win. As the night wound down and our guests headed home, Wendy and I cleaned up the kitchen together. She was humming softly, stacking plates in the dishwasher while I put away leftovers. "That was fun," she said. "It really was. You know what I love about this place now? It actually feels like a community. People care about each other. That is the difference good leadership makes. And good citizens who are willing to fight for what is right." I kissed her forehead. "We make a pretty good team." "Yeah, we do." We finished cleaning and went out to the back patio. The pool was lit up, casting rippling blue light across the yard. My vegetable garden was flourishing, tomatoes and peppers and herbs growing in abundance. Everything I had fought for was right here. Peace, autonomy, community, home. I had checked the county records on a whim, looking for any angle that might help me fight back against an oppressive HOA. What I found was more than just an easement. I found power, leverage, and ultimately justice. But more than that, I found out what I was capable of when pushed to the edge. I learned that standing up mattered, that documents and laws and rights were not just abstract concepts, but real tools that could change lives. The easement was still there, recorded in perpetuity in the county files. It would outlast all of us, a permanent reminder that sometimes history reaches forward and gives you exactly what you need to fight back against the present, and I would forever be grateful that I took the time to look for it. Wendy squeezed my hand. "What are you thinking about?" "Just how lucky I am." "We both are." We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the water shimmer and listening to the distant sound of laughter from somewhere in the neighborhood. Life in Sunset Ridge had become what it always should have been, peaceful, fair, and just. And it all started because I checked the county records and found an easement that gave me total control over HOA access. That simple discovery had been the domino that toppled everything else, exposing corruption, empowering neighbors, and ultimately transforming an entire community. Sometimes the answer to your problems is not loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet and buried in old paperwork, waiting for someone persistent enough to find it. I was glad I had been that person. I was glad I had not given up when things got hard. And I was glad that the fight had led me here, to this moment, to this life. As we headed inside for the night, I took one last look at the neighborhood. Lights glowed in windows up and down the street. Tomorrow, people would wake up and go to work and live their lives without fear of arbitrary fines or harassment from petty tyrants. They would live in a community that actually functioned the way it was supposed to. And that made everything worthwhile.